Hey everybody, it's Kirsten. Today I wanted to share some thoughts on Heartseeker and Marksman and the changes that I would like to see in both of those, as well as just on some other Marksman skills in order to make Marksman feel a little better in the end game, especially. Some of the changes that I'm going to highlight are going to be implementable in the short term, and some of them are obviously not going to be easy to implement. They're going to require some long-term thinking. But I wanted to share my thoughts because I don't think Marksman is in a good place right now. Let's start with Heartseeker. One of the first things I want to mention is some bugs. One bug in particular. It's not a massive bug, I think, but when you're fighting exiled mages, because of the hitboxes of the exiled mage, sometimes the Heartseeker just bounces back and forth between the target without actually hitting the target. So that's something that ideally ESG should be able to address pretty easily. I think it's only local to exiled mages because of their tiny hitbox, but worst case scenario, this bug could be actually happening with other enemy types as well. So it's best to fix it earlier rather than later. Next, in terms of balance, I do get the sense that Heartseeker is a little bit underperforming. What I would love to see for the skill is maybe some sort of ramp mechanic, rather than having something that puts it on a cooldown, which doesn't synergize well with a very high variance skill. The high variance with a cooldown means that once every 3 seconds you might get a ZDPS situation because you could get 2 recurves or maybe 20 recurves. So a high variance like that does not function well with cooldown. So maybe replace these cooldown nodes with a ramp effect where each additional hit increases the damage that consecutive Heartseeker recurves or hits deal to the target. Obviously, you have to cap that as well just because the skill hits so many times. But I think that would be a good addition to the skill where it can deal double to triple the damage to single target enemies over a course of 50 to 100 hits if you can get that ramp going. Sure, that would pigeonhole you a little bit into an attack speed playstyle, but at least it would give you a bit of a better option and would actually make Heartseeker work as a single target skill. Because right now, this was advertised as a single target specializing skill, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really excel at single target. The only other option is to maybe make the cooldown completely mitigatable with Fletcher's Resurgence if black arrows are made a little bit more viable. Otherwise, I do love nodes like Seeping Wounds and Bow Piercer. I think those are cool. They scale with itemization, so they're pretty strong in the end game. Similarly with Frozen Splinter, these kinds of skill nodes have a very high upside because this one, for example, is not capped, or because these ones, as you scale recurve, you just get that extra double damage essentially on the later hits of your Heartseeker. In terms of mana management on the passive tree of Rogue, we have Coated Blades. I think this skill is just way too punishing. 10% more damage from 5 mana consumed is just not worth it. You could play around with reducing it down to maybe 4, maybe later 3. It's just something that is super easy to play around with. Just bump the number down. It takes minimal effort. We haven't seen too many skills utilize this, and the ones that do require heavy investment into mana management afterwards between these two nodes. Maybe the only example is Hail of Arrows. So maybe to facilitate that combo playstyle, making Coated Blades a little bit more viable could be interesting, I think. And again, it doesn't have to be slashing it down to 2 mana consumed per point all at once. Just bump it down one at a time and see what happens. And speaking of mana consumed, that leads me to my next skill that I want to talk about. Dark Quiver. This is notoriously an extremely clunky and unpleasant skill to use, especially so in multiplayer where the entire screen is covered in ground effects and the black arrows become invisible. So I honestly would not recommend to anybody to try this skill. It's just not in a good state. And similar to the mana consume point I was making with the other 10% more multiplier, Archer's Focus, I think this mana consume should be entirely removed. There's already a penalty to utilizing Black Arrow. You have to go and pick it up. So then to get hit by 5 mana cost additional to that, I don't think that is necessary whatsoever for a 12% more damage boost. Not only that, but the recent update that made Dark Quiver allow you to pick up 3 copies of it, right? You can have 3 stacks of it, and I'll show you in one sec. So you can see I cast it, and I pick up 1, 2, 3 black arrows, right? The major problem comes with how Dark Quiver is currently utilized in most situations. It's used as a combo skill where you max out Umbra Resolution and you play around getting 3 black arrows, or sorry, 3 shadows, and then proccing them with a black arrow, and getting 1 giga hit with coated blades and hail of arrows, let's say, maybe something else, but mostly hail of arrows. After you use that hail of arrows, you want to get your mana back. And that usually is done with a mana generating 0 cost skill, whether it's Fury Punch or whatever, it doesn't matter really. When you have Archer's Focus at 4 points and 3 black arrows picked up, rather than regenerating mana, you end up using up those black arrows to consume 20 mana per mana generator activated. So that mana spender, mana generator combo is undermined by the fact that we can pick up 3 black arrows. Maybe we could make a setting where we specify that Flurry should not be using black arrow, but that clearly is not feasible from a development standpoint. It's not silly. Honestly, I think Archer's Focus mana consumption should be brought down either to 0 or to 1 max. It's just way too punishing given how nowadays 8 to 10% more damage multiplicative comes for free in most skill trees. And if the damage bonus proves to be too significant, maybe that can be brought down from 12 to 10. But just this mana consumption is very clunky in the skill overall. That's one little thing that I think will make the skill work better and feel better. Obviously, the skill needs a major overhaul, but until then, at least remove that mana consume, make it a little bit more viable. Now, let me talk a little bit about the Marksman defensive layers. In terms of defensive layers, we have dodge, we have against crits, critical strike avoidance, and we have glancing blow, which is a rogue defensive layer. These are kind of the 3 main defensive layers, other than obviously stacking health here and there, which rogues are not great at. And by the way, flat health is all that rogue gets. There is no percent health. And recently with the 1.2 patch, flat health got diluted. Percent health, on the other hand, is far more valuable because we have a lot more sources of flat health, with your levels giving you extra health, with your suffixes giving higher numbers of flat health. Flat health in general diminished in value, whereas percent health went up in value. So Rogue got the worst end of the 1.2 patch. Just a little note there. Now, in terms of these 3 defensive layers that I just mentioned, dodge, crit avoid, and glancing blow, all 3 of those have a binary outcome. You either succeed the roll or you don't. And when you don't succeed the roll, it feels awful because you take full damage. Something like armor is on a continuum. The more armor you invest in, the more damage you mitigate at all times. There is no variance. Having a high variance defensive layers or series of defensive layers that are high variance feels awful because it just takes one time for that defensive layer to not hold up and you're dead. Whereas low variance defensive layers are much more preferable. High variance DPS skills like, let's say, Heartseeker can be okay if you're proccing them frequently. If you're hitting a lot with them, you can average out that high variance over a short period of time with just high attack speed. So you can mitigate that downside of high variance. But on the defensive layer side, high variance is only perhaps acceptable against many small hits. In a game like Last Epoch, where we have many large hits that can one-shot you, a series of high variance defensive layers leads to a very unpleasant experience where you end up dying a lot. Let me demonstrate what I mean with a simple little simulation here. Let's say that we have an enemy that deals 2000 damage, has a 5% crit chance to do double damage as usual. And then our character has 3500 HP. And then we have 2 different setups. One with critical strike avoidance of 95%, the other one with crit damage reduction of 95%. And then one with dodge rating of 60%, other one with armor mitigation of 60%. Ignore the glancing blow, I haven't plugged it in yet, but just this very simple setup. We can simulate 10,000 hits fairly easily, and this is the damage done to the character 1, which has crit avoid and dodge, and this is the damage done to character 2, which has crit damage reduction and armor. As you can see, every time we click sim, the expected value of the damage is fairly close between the 2 characters. Here's one trial where we get 778 and 802. This time we got on the higher end of expected damage here with 811 and again 802. So this one is very consistent. And you'll notice because of that, the standard deviation of how much damage each character takes is extremely different. The character with crit damage reduction in armor has a standard deviation of 8. You're basically always taking something around 800 damage. 840 occasionally when you get crit. But your crit damage reduction is 95, so between 800 and 840, not a big difference. You can shrug that off. When you get crit as a rogue, and your crit avoidance doesn't proc, and your dodge doesn't proc, you're dead. You are dead. And that is 11 times out of 10,000 in this little simulation that the character just dies. This character, at least the rogue one. This sentinel, let's call it, with crit damage reduction armor, is never going to die unless it gets hit by 5 consecutive hits in a very close succession. So if we simulate it again, this 11, you can see it can be 14. I've seen a 7 in there. So there's a great variance in your survivability as a function of how lucky you are with your crit damage avoidance and dodge procs. Obviously, once we get crit strike avoidance up to 100%, things get a lot better and the variance goes down. So we'll see that go down to 978. But we're still running dodge. So that's still going to introduce large amount of variance. But the good news is death at 3500 HP is now at 0 because we're never going to take more than 2000 damage due to maxing out the crit avoidance. Crit avoidance is basically mandatory at 100% if you're choosing to play crit avoidance, whereas crit damage reduction is not. You can leave your crit damage reduction between 80 to 100%, somewhere in there, and feel pretty good about it, not worry about dying too frequently. Similar with armor. Armor is on a continuum. The more you have, the more incoming damage that you will be reducing. Whereas dodge, it's always binary. Whether you have 40% dodge or 80% dodge, some hits are going to sneak through. They're going to hit you like a truck. So this is what I wanted to really stress with this little sim, is that high variance damage mitigation doesn't feel great. For those of you that played Diablo 3, you may recall that when it first launched, the monk and the demon hunter class were scaling dodge rating with their primary attribute. And they could get like 90-95% dodge. However, the way that the game worked and the way that pushing greater rifts worked is that you would inevitably get hit once going through that 95% dodge and you would die because taking full damage from a hit was not survivable given how scaling worked. Eventually they reworked it so that dodge no longer worked that way and you actually just get straight up damage mitigation. Same as barbarians. Here's a quick little Google search. In patch 2.1, dexterity was changed to provide armor instead, a less random form of defense. Without any of these skills, the Nephilim have 0 chance to dodge attacks. I don't agree with this overview whatsoever. The change had nothing to do with how complex or difficult to understand the way to build defensive capabilities was whatsoever. It all had to do with variance, as explained right here. Dodge is high variance damage mitigation, where armor is low variance damage mitigation. And with all that said, the point that I'm trying to make is that Rogue has 3 high variance damage mitigation layers. And unless you get them to 100%, which is doable in the case of these two, the variance is just too painful. So I hope that helps a little bit. I know that's not something that can be changed in the short term. This has to be a long-term kind of defensive layer strategy when it comes to Rogue. What I'm hoping is that EHG choose to push Rogue in the direction of lower variance, more continuum-based damage mitigation, similar to some of the other classes. And I'm not even going to talk about Silver Shroud, because that is yet another binary mitigation layer. So that's what I wanted to share on Rogue and Marksman. I hope we can influence the direction that the class takes in the future, because I don't want the survivability of the class to be a series of high variance slot machines. Anyway, let me know in the comments below what you think are some of the strengths and weaknesses of Marksman and of Rogue in general, and what you would like to see change. As you can tell from this video, I enjoy thinking about min-maxing optimization. So share your thoughts and let's have a productive discussion. And if I ever consider making a continuation video of part 2 of what I think should happen or what I would love to see happen with Marksman, I might include some of your comments as well. In fact, I'm sure I'm missing a lot of obvious issues, but I also wanted to keep the video under 15 minutes. Anyways, take it easy and go chiso, sama deshita.